Hi, I'm Mr. Kangas, and today we're going to be taking a look at Chapter 6, Section 8, using percent equations. So the percent equation that you are going to use is basically stating that if you have a fraction, and fractions are represented by part over whole, it is equal to a percent over 100. Now, if you remember correctly, percents, like if I have 35%, it means out of 100. So this percentage is equal to 35 over 100. Now, if you also remember correctly, there are multiple ways of representing the same fraction because fractions are just simply division problems. And so, for example, 35 divided by 100 gets you an answer of 0.35. And this is not the only fraction or division problem that will get me an answer of 0.35. So there are what are called equivalent fractions. There are many fractions, or in other words, there are many division problems that will get me this value or this answer. So I can represent 35 over 100 with 70 over 200. If you divide 70 and 200, you get 0.35 as well. So these two fractions are equivalent because they're two division problems that get me the same value or the same answer. And every fraction, so what this is basically saying is that every fraction also represents a percentage. So essentially what this equation is doing is, for example, if I have the fraction 3/5, it's telling me that if I want to find out what 3/5 as a percentage is, I need to figure out the equivalent version of this fraction that has 100 as a denominator. Okay? So, I'm going to say that one more time just to make sure we understand. What this is saying is that every fraction can be written as a percentage. And if you want to write a fraction as a percentage, you need to find the equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 100, because remember, percentages are all written, okay, if I have 10%, they're all written with a denominator of 100 when in fraction form. So if you have a fraction with 100 as your denominator, you actually have a percentage. The top number represents your percentage. If you take a look at 10 over 100, the 10 represents the percentage, 10%. So, how is this useful? Well, if you want to know what 3/5 is as a percentage, then since 3/5 and this percent over 100 are equivalent and they're all in fraction form, they're equivalent fractions. If you cross multiply, remember, if you cross multiply equivalent fractions, the two answers you get are supposed to be equal. So if I want to know what 3/5 is as a percent, then I can cross multiply and then solve this one-step equation and figure out that the percentage, 3/5 actually represents 60%. Okay? So that's one way to do it if you have a fraction and you want to know what it is as a percentage. Because another thing that you also need to keep in mind is that you need to keep in mind that percentages are really just fractions in a different form. Because like we've said so far a couple times now, 10% literally means 10 out of 100. These two things are the same, they are equal, they are no different. So a percentage is just a way to represent a fraction that has a denominator of 100. So there are other things you can do with this percent equation, because you're not, sometimes, like maybe instead of wanting to know what 3/5 is as a percent, maybe you want to know what, let's go with 15% of 30 is. If you want to know what 15% of 30 is, okay, then the 30 would be down here, and what we're missing is up here, because up here would represent the 15% of 30. 30 is the whole, 15% would be less than the whole, would be less than 30. So if we're finding 15% of 30, 30 is going to go down here in the whole section. We're missing the part. In the part represents that 15%. 30 represents the whole. Over here, 100 represents the whole. 15 is the part. Over here, 30 is the whole. And X would represent that 15% or that part. So if we cross multiply again, we get 100X. 15 times 30. You do 10 times 30 is 300. 5 times 30 is 150. We get 450. And you end up finding out, if you do the math out, you end up when you want to get rid of the 100, because this is a one-step equation. The 100 is being multiplied. So we would divide both sides by 100. Get X on the right. 450 divided by 100 is 4.5. So this is just kind of an example of how the percent equation is used. Now on your worksheet for 6-8, they're going to your
They should go change up and go to the library for their pictures. That's the Nordic cross-country ski team.
In your worksheet, you're going to be given a variety of questions. And you're just going to need to understand the percent equation. So like we said before, we have part, we have whole, and it is equal to, and the 100 is always here. That number is always here because this right side represents the percentage, and percents are always out of 100. So like, for example, on your worksheet, you might be given what is 10% of 300? So they've given you the percentage, which is 10, so that's where your percentage would go. So when you're setting up your percent equation, you would fill in the percent with 10. The 100 is always there. And so what you're missing is a piece of your fraction. You're going to have to figure out what piece that is by reading and understanding the question. Okay? You're trying to find a percentage of 300. Okay? Up here represents the percentage, just like up here represents the percentage. 10 is the percentage up here. So if you want to find a percentage of 300, that means you're missing this. The 300 is your whole. Okay? Because we're trying to find a piece of the whole, or a percentage of the whole, which is 300. We're trying to find 10% of 300. We're trying to find a piece of 300. So this is how you'd set it up. You'd cross multiply. You'd get 100 equals 3,000. Okay? And then you would, or 100x I should say, x times 100. And then you would divide both sides, solve that one-step equation, and you would find x. Now another style of question you're going to get, okay, instead of saying what is 10% of something, they might ask you, what is, or better one, find 10%. 40, right there. 48 is what percent of 200 is another question you might get. Okay. 48 is what percent of 200? So let's go back to our percent equation here. They're asking what percent of 200. So we don't know what the percentage is. So right there you know that's the x. And we know that we want to know 48 is what percent of 200. So 48 is the part, 200 is the whole. Cross multiply, you get a one-step equation, solve that one-step equation. So really the tough part in this section is going to be interpreting the question and filling in the blanks appropriately, figuring out which piece is missing. Once you have your equation set up, it's pretty simple from there. It can be kind of time consuming depending on the numbers that you get, but it is definitely not a difficult task. 13. So other than that, there really isn't a whole lot to it. There's one other type of question you're going to see. So for example, you might see 10 is 5% of what number? Okay, so this This question's slightly different from the other ones. And please, if you're one of my students, you should hopefully have been taking notes on both the percent equation and different types of questions you're going to see. So if you haven't done that, you may want to pause, go back and do that. So 10 is 5% of what number? So again, we're going to set up our percent equation here, put in the 100. We've got the percentage. Okay, they gave it to us. They said 5%. And so now we're looking at the part or the whole, the fraction here. And we want to know, are we missing the part or are we missing the whole? Well, 10 is 5% of what number? So 10 is a piece of what number? So if 10 is a piece, then 10 would go here. X would go here. We're missing the whole in this case. You cross multiply, you get 5x equals 1,000, and go from there. You do your division out, and you'll figure out what x is. We all should be at this point be able to do these one-step equations. I shouldn't have to go through and show you how to do that. If you don't know how to do one-step equations, the videos on 3.3 and 3.4 will show you how to do that. So that really is all there is to this section. There will not be a second or third or fourth video. This is it. So tune in for next video on Chapter 6, Section 9.